Baking an armature animated mesh is no different from any other kind of mesh with any other kind of animation. Here I have an armature animated character with a single animation applied to the armature. That animation is 71 frames long, so I'm going to set the frame range as I did before. Now I'm going to press Shift and G and choose Children to select all the child objects of the armature. I just want to make sure that one of those objects is the active object, so I'll shift click on the body mesh. And with that, we'll do a quick success check. This is going to cost me 22.34% of my available VAT space. More than acceptable, so let's click on Bake. I'm going to sort the list of objects alphabetically and bake them. There we go. Let's have a look at that VAT mesh. And there's the animation playing. As you can see, the mesh that the VAT Man has created has the pose that the original armature object had the moment that I clicked Bake. Now, if I want, for example, my VAT character, to be absolutely in a T pose, for example, I can very quickly go into pose mode in that armature and reset the scale, rotation, and location for all the bones, giving me a standard T pose. And once again, I'm going to select all the child objects and I'll bake that again from frame 1 to frame 71. But the VAT mesh returned will have this shape as opposed to the shape of frame 1. Let's once again sort the list alphabetically and bake those objects. There we go. Let's have a look. Once again, it has put it in the same Sophie Body VAT collection. I'm going to hide the original. You can see it is in T-pose and the animation is as before. Very nice. So that's an armature with a single animation. Now let's have a look at baking a string or a chain of animations to one single object. I'm going to quickly go over to the animation tab and I'll remove the animation directly associated to the armature. I have 3 animations associated to this armature via the NLA editor. You'll see I have the original Rumba dance, then I have the silly dancing animation, followed by a short hip-hop dance. All of these animations come from Mixamo. If you want to get your hands on those animations, that's where you'll find them. So all I need to know is the end frame for each of these animations. So I'll select each individual bar and go to the last frame. Let me show you what I'm doing with the screencast keys. To get to the last frame of the animation, I press Shift and right arrow to go to the end of the available frames, and then the down arrow to go to the last keyframe. That shows me that the last frame of this animation is 71. So I'll press M to add a marker and do the same for the second animation. And finally the third, but here I'm just going to set the end of the blend file to that frame, rather than setting a third marker. Okay, now I'm going to bake the animation as before, but I should adjust the last frame of the VAT bake to 252, or I can just click this button to set the frame to the current frame of the blend file. Shift G to select the children, make sure one of them is active. Let's do a success check. We're below 80%, that's absolutely fine, so let's bake them. Alphabetical order as before, bake the objects. There we go. Let's have a look at the result. We have a single mesh with 2 materials applied and 3 individual animations baked to that material or to those materials. So now that we have one single animation containing 3 individuals, we need to split them up. Now that's very easily done. I'm going to set the end frame of this animation to the first marker, which is 71. Now I'm going to click the new animation button, which has created a new VAT animation for me. You'll see that the first frame is automatically set to 1 frame above the end frame of the previous animation. I'm going to set the end frame to 186 and create a final animation And the frame numbers are automatically set for me again, 187, one above the end of the previous animation, and 252 representing the end of the VAT. Let's have a look at the animations. Animation 3, Animation 2, and number 1. We can give these animations their names. Anim 1 was the rumba dance, Anim 2 was the silly dance, and Anim 3 was the hip-hop dance. To preview those animations, as you've already seen, you can click here, these little buttons to the left, or you can change this value at the top, the current animation integer, and this value can also be keyframed. We'll begin the animation with animation 1. Then around frame 100, we'll switch to animation 2, and around 191, we'll switch to animation 3. It's best to make these keyframes, constant interpolation, which you'll do by going to the Animation tab, and down here in the Graph Editor, select those keyframes, press T on your keyboard, and choose Type Constant. Now we can go back to the Layout view, and we should see around frame 100 the animation change. There it goes, now around 190. There it is. And that's how you keyframe animation changes. Now this little button here, this From Start button, if this option is checked, that means that every time a new animation is selected, either manually or by keyframe, it will start playing that animation from its first frame. You can see this number change when the animation gets selected. That is the offset that has been introduced to make sure that that animation begins from its first available frame. And the same thing happened again when animation 3 was selected. If instead it's not important that the animation be played from its beginning, you can just deselect this From Start option, and the animations will switch as they did before and pick up at whatever relative frame is currently being played. And that's how you create a VAT object with several animations baked into one. Let's have a look at another multi-animation character, but one with which it's not going to be possible to chain the animations directly together. The reason for that is the fact that this character has a cloth simulation attached, and a cloth simulation will usually require a few frames of lead-in before the actual animation starts to play. The reason for this is that the cloth is usually modeled while the character is in a T-pose, so to avoid the simulation actually exploding, about 30 frames of lead-in is usually added at the beginning. Let's go have a look in the animation section. Here I have the lead-in animation. This first bar is a compilation of 30 frames of lead-in and then one iteration of the actual dance animation, whereas the second bar is the dance animation itself, unaltered. I actually need to extend my timeline right here, so I'll set the timeline to end at the end of the original animation, and I'm going to set a marker at the beginning of that animation. I already have this cloth sim baked and ready to go, so I'm ready to bake out my VAT. I'm going to start the baking at the beginning of the timeline when my character is in a T-pose, so that's the shape my VAT object will be. The VAT start and end frames are already set correctly, so I'll select the skirt and the body. And in these cases, the order of the objects is going to be important, so I'm just going to make sure that I always sort them alphabetically to avoid any problems. And we have one final thing to check, which is the UV map. When the VAT object is created, it will combine the UV maps, it will add all the UV maps to the final object. And to avoid having several different UV maps when you might have originally expected only one, the simple way to avoid that is to make sure all the UV maps have the same name, which I'm going to do by replacing the name of the body model to UV map to match that of the skirt. The VAT Man offers some tools to remedy this issue if you forget to do this before baking, but we'll see that in the second example. For now, let's bake these out to get our first VAT model. There we go. Let's have a look and see what she looks like. Very nice. All the materials are looking good, the animation loops perfectly, and we're in good shape. The base mesh is in a T-pose as I wanted. So let's move on and bake out the second animation. First, I'll release the baked physics for the skirt. And let's select the armature and head over to the animation tab. I'm going to hide the top animation and play the second. These are the lead-in frames with one repetition of the dance, and then the standard repeating dance animation will begin. I'll let that play out for a few iterations of the animation. 2 should be more than enough. Okay, and I'll stop it there. Select the skirt and click Current Cache to Bake under the Physics tab to save the cloth simulation for the skirt. I can get rid of this marker now because I'm going to need some new ones. Let's make sure I have the armature selected, and I'll set one marker for the beginning of the animation and one marker for one frame before the end. Just like that. Now back to frame 1. Now this time I'm not going to change the name of the UV map so you can see what to expect and how to replace it. But of course I changed the UV map of the body, so let me just change this again to purposefully cause the issue that I then want to solve, but it's all demonstration, isn't it? Body UVs. Select the skirt, select the body. Let's set the start and end frames. Frame 102 to begin and 162 to end. Sort the list alphabetically and bake. I neglected to go back to the first frame of the timeline, and that means that my character is not in a T-pose, so I'm just going to delete this one and bake that out again. Starting from frame 1, these frames remain unchanged. I'll just select the 2 objects, sort them and bake them. Okay, there we go. My character is in a T-pose as I would expect. Let's have a look at the UV maps. In fact, I now have 2 UV maps for the body, plus the third VAT Man UV, which will always be there for every VAT Man object. But let's have a look at the render and see what she looks like. Clearly, we have an issue. So, what we're going to do is select the object and go into edit mode. As a matter of fact, let me show you this in the UV editing tab. Okay, so as we can see, if I select the vertices of the skirt, that is the UV map for the skirt, and there are no UVs for the body in this current UV map. If I select body UVs, I expect to get the inverse. The body indeed does have UV coordinates, the skirt does not. So what I'm going to do is open the N tab, and here in the VAT Man panel you'll see in edit mode it looks a little different. Here we have UV transfer options, and we can transfer the UV coordinates for selected vertices from one map to another. So I'm going to transfer the UV coordinates from body UVs to the UV map by selecting all vertices and then deselecting the skirt. Here I can see the UV coordinates for the body, for the eyes, but no skirt there. I'm going to select to transfer the UVs from body UVs to UV map. Transfer the selected vertices, and now if I take a look at the UV map and select all vertices, you'll see I have all UV coordinates in one map and ready to go. So I can now remove the body UV's UV map, and now let's have a look in rendered view, and that looks much better. The animation plays correctly, loops nicely, and my character is good to go with a base mesh in a T-pose just as I wanted. So now I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process for the other animations, and then I will bake them all out to VAT and join them together. This will take a few minutes, so I will speed this section of the video up and see you in a few minutes. Okay, there we go. I've baked out my 5 individual animations. Let's see how they look. Beginning from the first hip-hop dance, which we have already seen. Looking good. Next up we have the rumba dance. also looking good. The catwalk animation looks good. Simple walk animation looking good. And finally the jog animation also looking excellent. So now we have 5 VAT objects. Let's just move them around here so we can actually see them. And there we go. All of my models begin in the same pose, and that's going to be necessary for merge to actually work. We should be ready to go. I'm going to select all of them, do a success check. This should take us up to just above 73%, which is excellent. Let's give the animations some names so we're going to be able to recognize them after the merge. Here we have Hip Hop, which actually on Mixamo is known as Hip Hop 3, I believe. Then we have the Rumba. Then Catwalk, Standard Walk, and finally Jog. Select all of those objects. I've already done the success check. I know it should work. Click Merge VATs. The order is already numerical, so that'll work well. Merge. And we're given a new object. I'm going to hide the original VAT collection. Let's have a look at our new one. We should have 5 animations, one after the other. That's the hip hop. That's the rumba. Catwalk. Standard walk. And jog. Let's just quickly sort out these names. These names are actually created based on the name of the animation with the name of the mesh from which they were taken. I don't need the name of the mesh, so I can remove them from all the animations. Excellent. If you ever find that your animation list is getting too big, when you have several animations, if you've joined together numerous characters with numerous animations each, the animation list can actually get a little long. You can click this button here for a more compact view, save some space in your UI and keep things nice and tidy. And there you have it. Now we have a single multi-animation VAT character with a built-in cloth simulation ready to be exported and brought into your favorite game engine. So as we've seen, in order for merge to work, we need the base meshes to be the same shape, the same pose essentially. So what can we do in cases where we need the base mesh to be of a certain shape, but we can't arrange our source mesh or source objects into that shape? Well, that is what the morph function is for. To demonstrate this, I'm going to go back to the Sophie demos from before. Here I have Sophie doing her rumba dance, and now I want to merge another version with another dance, and let's see how we go about that. First of all, let's go back to the original Sophie and bake a new VAT object. We'll apply a different dance animation to her armature. We'll go for the silly dance. First of all, let's set the frame range as always. It ends at 116 and begins at 1. Now then, back to our VAT models. I'm going to move this over to the side and I'm going to create a duplicate by pressing Shift and D and move it to the back out of the way. Let's select this object and we're going to remove its materials. In order for morph to work, the target object must have no materials assigned. The materials will be created new and fresh for it as part of the process. Let's go back to the source object. I'm going to select the armature and Shift G to select all the children. And then finally Shift select my target mesh. You'll see the morph options become available. I can success check as always. We shouldn't have any problems here. Let's click on Bake to Target, and if you remember from earlier, I organized all the objects by sorting them alphabetically. I'm going to do that again, and now I'm going to click Bake to Target, and this is going to bake the animation onto my target mesh. So let's see what we get. Okay, baking's done. I'm going to hide the source object. Now let's have a look. The base meshes look absolutely identical, so they are suitable for merging, but let's see what they look like when I render. Have a look at that. A completely different shape, a completely different animation. And I can now grab these two objects and merge them together. We have the silly dance, and we have the rumba dance, all in one mesh and one set of VAT textures. And that's how morphing works. The last type of VAT baking to see is particles baking. I have a couple of particle demo scenes here ready to go. As before, baking particles is no different to baking any other type of mesh using the VAT Man. The only prerequisites are that the particle system must use an object as the render object. It can't use collections, it has to be a single mesh object, and the particle system can't use any type of children. Other than that, all other particle features and options are available. This particular particle system is 300 frames long. I'm going to set the end of the blend file to 300, and I have it arranged in a type of looping animation, which actually loops from frame 51 to frame 300, I think. No, it must be 250. Yeah, there we go. So let's go from frame 51 to 250. I'll select the emitter object. Take note, however, that the emitter object won't be included in the VAT bake, only the particles. I have my object selected. Let's do a success check. Particle bakes tend to be significantly bigger. In fact, you see there 94%. I'm getting very close to the maximum allowed, and so I will expect to see some errors, but we can hopefully address those with some VAT correction, which we'll see in just a second. Also notice that the particle check gives you a number of particles, which is equivalent to a number of points, which is equivalent to the percentage of the recommended for a VAT bake. This number of particles represents the particles pool and also represents the maximum number of particles which will be available on screen at any given time. Let's go ahead and bake this and see how we do. Okay, there we go. Let's have a look at our baked object. There's the object itself. It actually takes the shape of the particle object being used. Let's go to rendered view, and there is the animation. And there is the error I was expecting. Okay, so how do we address this? These errors will tend to happen the closer you get to 100% of the available space in a VAT, the more likely these errors are to happen. Come to the Animations tab in the VAT Man panel and come down here to where it says Material Settings, and you'll find one option here called Correction. Whether this value needs to be increased or decreased depends on the object in case and the material. So let's, for starters, try to drag it downwards and see if, in fact, there we go, it immediately gets better. I'm going to keep reducing it until the problems disappear. Reduce it again. There we go. That should be good, I think. Indeed it is. That gets us through the entire animation, and all of those broken polygons have disappeared. So there we go. That's one successful particle system bake. Let's try another one with a different arrangement. That's the animation, and again it is 300 frames long, and this one also is set up to loop more or less between frame 51 and frame 300 this time. Indeed, there it is. I'm going to leave this set to 51, increase this one to 300. Now this particular particle system takes advantage of the random values available per particle in Blender. It's taken advantage of in the shader to change the color of some particles to red, some particles to white. The VAT Man also offers the option to bake random values per particle. This is the option right here. When you check this on, it's called Generate Random UVs. This is a random value per particle, and it is indeed, as suggested, baked into the UV map. So with all that said and done, let's go ahead and bake our particle system. Bake-in particle systems will usually be significantly slower than bake-in smaller numbers of mesh objects, just because of the incredibly large number of meshes on screen at any given time. There we go. I'll hide the original collection and let's check out the VAT bake. I didn't actually show you. Let me show you the success check. If I'm not wrong, this one is even higher than the previous one. In fact, we are right at 100% of the allowed VAT space. So I will definitely have to correct this one. Let's see how far we get before the errors start to happen. There we go. We didn't actually do too badly. Let's go right to the end of the animation and then we'll correct there. And hopefully those corrections should be enough for the rest. Dragging correction down again. Downwards is the right direction to go. Around about there. Let's see. Okay, I think we're good to go with that. Now you will notice that the random colors have disappeared, so we're going to have to go to the shader editor and make some changes to our VAT material. Let's get a look at what we're doing here in rendered view. Now then, let's have a look at the VAT Man panel available in the shader editor. Very few options here and all to do with shader nodes. I'm going to click here to add a particles random node to the network. And there it is, and this outputs the random value per particle, as mentioned before. So I'm going to swap the noodle from random, go into this greater than node, and there we have it. There are the random colors as before. You can use that random number to do anything you want in the shader editor. You can even use it to offset the animation. Let me show you how you would go about doing that. This is the VAT Man node, and it uses a driver to pass the current frame of the Blender file. As you can see, when I press play, that number increases right there. Again, that is done by a driver. I'm going to add a math node and multiply the output of my particles random node. I'm going to multiply it by the number of frames in this VAT animation, which is 250. I'll add another math node. This one's going to be add. And I'm going to add this random value from 250 to the current frame value. Hover over this purple input indicating the driver, right click and select copy driver. And now we'll paste that driver into the bottom of the add node. Now plug the result of the add node into that current frame input. And now you'll see that our particle system is looping somewhat perfectly. Towards the end of the animation, we'll start to notice that it freezes up and all comes to a stop. The way to get around that is to take the total frames of the blend file, in this case 300, add the number of frames in the animation, which is 250, so we're looking at 550, and put that into the stop frame in playback settings right here. 550, and there we have a perfect loop. There you go. That's how you use the random values in particles. Anything you can think of to do in the shader editor, you can use this output to do it. This gives you a 0 to 1 number. It's completely random for each particle, and your only limit is your imagination.